Elaine, thanks for joining us today.
Hi.
Hi, so you're here to tell us more about yourself and your book, The Kaduka.
Yep.
That's going to be coming out very soon, isn't that right?
Yes, so mid-March 2021.
Could you tell us a little bit about The Kaduka?
Yeah, sure. Well, it's science fiction, sort of action, adventure, space opera, if you're into subcategories of science fiction. So it's set on a planet called Benan Ty. It's imagining it's about 900 years in the future from now. So it's imagining that we've gone to space and humans have settled loads of planets and had the great mighty Terran empire, and then that's all fallen apart. So there's all these sort of human colonized planets out there, which are now very poor and run down and have all sorts of different varieties of oppressive government. So it's telling the story of what happens when the major power in the universe, which isn't us, it's an alien species, decides that, right, we want to expand our influence in this area, so we're going to use the fact that there's a dictator on this planet as a reason to invade this planet. So it's looking at their motivations and what the humans on the planet do about it, and so on.
Okay, so the Kaduka's got a bit of a political flavour to it, is that right?
Yes, very much so. I am a political animal.
Yeah, you are. I was just going to ask you that. So that comes from your background and your interest. You've got a huge interest in politics. So how did that come about, and how has that influenced your book, The Kaduka?
Right. Well, I was brought up in a very political household. So my family is very right wing, and I'm very left wing. So you can imagine that our family discussions can get quite interesting at times. But I always figure that if you have quite deeply held political views, it's very difficult to bring up children with just kind of vaguely centrist views. I always tell my parents when they're objecting to my politics that, well, they brought me up to be a political extremist. They just couldn't decide which way. So I've been a political activist for 20 years or so. Started out on sort of climate change, which is still one of my interests, but also sort of stop the war, that sort of thing. So yeah, that very much comes out in the book.
So you're very, very passionate about politics, and all that passion is poured into the book.
Very much so, yeah.
Do you think that more and more people now are moving towards reading science fiction books?
Well, I couldn't necessarily give you statistics, but I think in sort of turbulent times like we're in at the moment, then science fiction and other sorts of speculative fiction really come into their own, because it's kind of a way of being able to step back and look at not just the sort of the details of how people live today, but step back and say, well, actually, why does society work like this? Why does politics work like this? How could it be different? And sort of explore ways that we could make it different. I think that's one of the points of science fiction. So I think these sorts of times are very good for that. And I think anecdotally, I think lots of people, including me, have spent most of the pandemic at home reading apocalyptic fiction. So I think it is the time for these sorts of books.
Do you believe that we as a society are going to move towards reading more science fiction?
Well, I would like to think so, because I think speculative fiction has often been thought of as being a kind of a rather unrespectable genre. I was just coincidentally, I was just reading an old interview with the late great Terry Pratchett, where the interviewer said to him, well, you're a really good writer, so you could write anything. So why are you bothering with this ridiculous fantasy stuff? And he quite correctly told the interviewer where to get off. So I think there has been a bit of a movement to convince people that genre fiction can be good literature. I, of course, cannot say whether the Kaduka is good literature or not, but I was certainly trying to have, a novel that's political, that's science fiction, but has also got a sort of literary standard, if you like. So.
And it's brilliant escapism.
Yeah, and the experience of writing it was similar. I never quite understand why, really, although there are many great books about sort of modern day life, but for me individually, I never quite understand why I'd want to sit down and write about being a middle-aged female author trying to write a book. It's like that's what I'm trying to get away from. The way that reading science fiction and writing science fiction can transport you to other worlds is really important, I think.
Is that why you read science fiction, or is it escapism for you, or is it reflective of what has been going on in your life and your past experiences?
Yeah, I wouldn't quite put it as escapism, because that implies that it has no connection to the world. And I think like I said, what I value about speculative fiction is the way that it can enable you to ask the difficult questions about why our society works in the way it does. But it does that in an entertaining way. You know, it's not like reading an anthropology textbook or something.
How important is science to you?
Well, I mean, for me, I mean, I'm not a scientist, so my science fiction writing isn't really about the science. And I think all writers of space opera have this difficulty, really, because you know, for space opera to work, you have to have lots of different races interacting with each other out there. And of course, the thing is that probably isn't really very scientifically likely. So you're kind of taking a leap away from really what we think the science of space exploration and alien races and so on would be, because it's probably not all that plausible that it's kind of like the world writ large out there. But on the other hand, it does have to be credible, I think, and it does have to be rooted in what we think is not necessarily the most likely version, but is kind of vaguely possible. Otherwise, it's just magic. Otherwise, what you're doing is writing fantasy in space, which is fine. It's a perfectly reasonable thing to do, but that's not what I'm doing.
Yeah.
So but I think the sort of the days of the sort of science fiction in the 50s, when it was very much about, often was very much about, we think that this is the new frontier for humanity, and it's actually kind of making actually fairly concrete predictions about this is what life's going to be like in 50 years' time. I mean, I don't think that's what the best modern science fiction is doing anymore, and that's certainly not what I'm trying to do.
No, it sounds like a really interesting book. Can you tell me where it fits in on, it's a science fiction book, where does it fit in on the hard soft sci-fi spectrum?
Yeah, so that's what I mean. I think it's pretty soft in that it's not led by the technology, by the science. I'd like to think it's led by the political science, which after all is a sort of science, and so it's very definitely plausible. And I tried not to make any really terrible errors, like having ships burning merrily away in a vacuum with no oxygen for them to fuel the fire, and those sorts of terrible howlers from science fiction gone by. But it's pretty soft.
There are a few alien characters in the Kaduka. How hard, easy, or challenging, how hard, challenging was it to write about aliens?
I find that really fascinating, because, and you have to make them somewhat human-ish if they're having relationships with humans, because otherwise your plot doesn't work if they're completely and utterly different and there's no point of intersection at all. Certainly not for the sort of thing that I'm trying to do in the Caduca. But you do have to always remember that what you're writing is an alien consciousness that doesn't come from human cultures. So you have to embed that into your language. So it's not just a kind of an artificial understanding. It's things like, how do they gesture, how do they swear? I mean, these things are very culturally specific.
How do they swear?
Well, that's the thing. So the Chime, who are the main alien race in the Caduca, they don't have a concept of a god. They believe in sort of the oneness of the universe. So they don't have monotheistic religions that we do. So they can't say anything to do with damned, because they don't have heaven and hell. That's not their religion. So for them, the worst thing that can happen to you is that you're shunned, you're removed from the community, because it's all about the sort of collective for the Chibe. So they say, I'll be shunned if I'll put up with X, Y, or Z, because that's for them the worst thing. So it's kind of working out things like that. And gestures as well.
Very intricate, very complex, but very interesting.
It's really fun to do, although it makes proofreading really hard. My mother, big shout out to my mother for doing the proofreading. I had to give her a whole long list of kind of body language that Chime don't have, so that she'd make sure that I didn't say that a Chime shrugged when they don't shrug, and that sort of thing. It gets very complicated.
How much longer did it take to get all of that quite right? Thinking, well, an alien would do this, or an alien compared to a human, what would an alien do in this situation?
Yeah, well, it took quite a lot of rewrites, and I think they got more alien each time. Because I was working this out as I was going along, in a sense, because this was the first science fiction I'd written, so I was sort of learning as I went how to do that. And trying to kind of and also trying to work out, well, how do you write an alien race that doesn't come from a class society, that aren't alienated in the way that we are for being part of an exploitative society. So all of that is hard. But I think, you know, to be honest, I'm not sure that that's purely because I was writing about aliens. I mean, to be honest, I think if you're writing anything, you kind of have to go over every word several times. I think that's how you, personally, I think that's how you get good literature. So it's a different sort of work, but I don't think it was more work.
Is there much similarities between humans and aliens, would you say?
Well, realistically, probably not really, no. But
I thought you'd say, yeah, probably. We're quite similar, don't you think?
well, I think in the book they mostly are, but I think the main difference is the kind of actually class society. So Chime is a class society. They're not exactly capitalist because, you know, they're not human. They haven't had the same historical development that we have, but they have a, you know, they have hierarchy, they have exploitation, and so on. Whereas another alien race, who are the original inhabitants of Benan Ty, they don't have class. So they are really, really alien. They are really different from the humans. And the humans, neither the humans nor the Chime in the book ever really understand the Jeban characters that they're interacting with. So I had to try very hard to make the Jebans really different, which I hope I managed.
How did that idea come into your head that you're going to write about this? Experiences, life experiences? How did it happen?
There isn't really one thing that I can say, oh, well, it's the story of X. It just sort of evolved. I mean, at the base of it is a relationship between two female characters, the Chime ambassador who's sent to Benan Ty, and one of the members of the guerrilla terrorist group that's fighting the government. And I think an awful lot of my fiction, ever since that I've been writing all my life, is often about sort of two female opposites, which I think is me sort of exploring different versions of me. So both of those characters are kind of me and kind of not. But as to how I came up with actually that story and that setting, I don't know really. I mean, stories just arrive and then they change halfway through. I mean, I don't just sort of start and write. I always do have a plan. But as for when I'm writing the plan, it just sort of evolves, and you kind of think, oh, I wanted this to happen to this character, but the character is telling me that no, that's not what they're going to do. They're going to do something else, and you kind of see connections that you hadn't realized were there and things. It kind of just, you know.
But it's quite unique. It's a unique plot. It's a unique story. It's different.
I hope so.
And a few of the characters in the Kaduka are bad. They've done some very bad things. How was that? Was that easy? Was that how was it? How did you find that? How did you find writing about these characters who have done some awfully bad things? How was it?
Yeah, well, that is really difficult, and some of the things. I mean, there's no really graphic scenes in the Kaduka, which is really because I didn't want to have the graphic details in my own head to write it. So, so I'm not graphic about it. But yeah, and I think it's important not to sugarcoat things. So, you know, many of my characters are terrorists, for want of a better word, and while I kind of wanted to show that, well, they are still people. You know, they're not just these irredeemably evil things that have no humanity at all, because they still live with each other, have relationships, have dinner, laugh together, have memories together. You know, all those things are still true, despite the fact that they are really severely messed up and severely do really appalling things. So I was interested in exploring that sort of humanity. But in doing that, I really couldn't be, oh, well, they're not so bad because they only blow up buildings, they don't kill people. You know, you can't shy away from the reality of the awful things that they've done. So I felt that was important to, you know, to make that well, it's not that, okay, you're still human if you only blow up buildings and you don't actually blow up people. You know, you can blow up people and come home and have a nice dinner with your comrades still. So that was kind of what I was doing with that. But yeah, it is hard.
Did you have to do a lot of research on that? Did you have to read up about people who do those, you know, stories, news articles about people who have done things like that, and then try to understand it? Was there a lot of research that was done when you were?
Some research. I mean, they bear, people who know about it will notice that they bear quite a strong resemblance to The Shining Path, and I did do some research on The Shining Path when I was first writing the novel. But really, I think one of the things about science fiction is that you can use your imagination as long as it's plausible. You don't need, no one can fact check me because this is stuff that's happening 900 years in the future, so the books haven't been written yet. So I kind of, it's a basis in research and a basis in my political understanding and things that I've read over the years, just sort of generally. But then I just sort of let my imagination go where it wanted to go.
Do you think it'll make people look at them from different angles, maybe from different aspects?
Yeah, I hope so. I mean, what I'm trying to say with that, I think, is that it's not that there are good people and there are bad people, and the good people just have to extirpate the bad people, and that's all. Everyone does what the system and the situation that they find themselves in drives them to do, and that's not an excuse, and that's not to say that there shouldn't be consequences for those people, but we can't understand the world by just saying, well, some people are just evil. And we're encouraged to do that because we're encouraged to just see that, well, everything that the West does is fine and everything that anyone else does is against the West is appalling. And I think it's that sort of simplistic thinking that ends up with us bombing countries to free them and so on and so on. So I think it's really important that we allow ourselves to have a nuanced understanding even of people who've done absolutely terrible things. So yeah, that's what I'm trying to do. I hope it works.
Does that come across quite strongly in your book?
I would like to think so, yeah. I mean, so no, I'm not going to give spoilers away for the end, but don't worry, I'm not giving anyone who's done appalling things an easy ride.
Now tell me again, we're going to go back to your political experience, but what is the political message that the Kaduka is carrying? What is the main political message, the political point that is being made in the Kaduka?
Well, mainly, I mean, I'm not just making sort of one point, because that makes it sound like it's a sort of a simplistic allegory, which I hope it isn't. But it's mostly it's an anti-imperialist novel. It comes out of the experience of the last 20 years or 20 years or more of Western foreign policy, really. So it's talking about that process where we're told that, well, we have to invade X country because we have to save them from themselves, and we have to free them by dropping enormous bombs on them, and that kind of how that works, and how it is to both be on the receiving end of that and to be in that machine, and being a sort of a cog in that machine when you're someone who believes that we're trying to help these people and is well intentioned and so on. So the main political message really is that this is not a way to run a world. We should not be doing this. We should not be supporting this. But I'm hoping that it comes over in a not too dogmatic and an entertaining way.
Now, I would like to ask you about books that have inspired you, authors that have inspired you, and what type of writing you have done before you wrote the Kaduka.
Right, sure. I mean, basically, as I think many people do, I would basically love to be Ursula Le Guin. Her work has inspired me all the way from when I was a kid and I first read the Wizard of Earthsea trilogy, as it was then, all the way up to her adult novels, sort of The Dispossessed, and Always Coming Home, which is the absolute best picture of a sort of post-class utopia that you can have, which is absolutely fantastic. And I love it particularly because she comments that the people there are not a thin people. So I think it's validating of persistent snacking and plumpness, which I think is absolutely fantastic. So I really love Ursula Le Guin's work, and particularly because, again, what she's doing is, I mean, she's taking an anthropological rather than sort of political stance necessarily, but what she's doing is looking at, well, why does our society work like that? If you change one variable, how would that be different, and what does that tell you about our current society? So whether it's fantasy or whether it's set thousands of years in the future, she's always talking about the present, and that's what I think the best speculative fiction does. So as you asked me about what else I've written, I've written sort of medieval history, I've written on politics, I've written some short stories, science fiction, they're kind of in the same world. So they're not set on Benan Ty, but they've still got the Chime and the other alien races that are in the Caduca. Which after all, because I've been writing since I was about 4, so that's quite a long time now.
4 years old?
Well, it wasn't very long. It was about... So my first novel was 10 pages long, and my arm got tired halfway through, so I made my mum write out the end of it to my dictation. But I was very proud of it. It's my first novel.
Wow. So from 4 years on, you've been writing, and has the passion just grown?
Yeah, I think so. And yeah, I think if from when I was about 8 and realised that a novelist was something that you could be, I wanted to be a novelist. So yeah, it took me 40 years, but I made it.
Tell me more about yourself, about your background.
So I grew up in North London, and I now live in a subtly different part of North London. So I sometimes say I'm like one of the medieval peasants that I study when I'm doing medieval history, because I've never lived, or hardly ever lived, more than 5 miles from my birthplace. So I live with my partner and an elderly and demanding tabby cat who is much more trouble than my partner. And I work for a charity. I'm actually a qualified accountant, which is the day job, but that's not very interesting.
An alien accountant or a human accountant?
Qualified accountant. Alien accounting would be fun. I bet alien species don't have double entry bookkeeping. It'd be really interesting to see invent alien accountancy. I think you might have given me an idea there.
Tell me more about how your experiences with work, with jobs, with your life have influenced your writing.
Well, I mean, the main experience is the activism, I think, but I think partly. I always kind of was quite suspicious of sort of received wisdom, I think, from very young, and I always sympathised with bad guys. So my first, my 4-year-old novel was about a gnome who stole an old lady's purse and got away with it, because I didn't like the fact that in stories, if someone did a bad thing, then they always got caught by the police, and I thought that was unfair. So the last scene was him in his house laughing with this woman's purse. Oh. So I always wanted to question what you were told to think and what you were told to support, and I think that's been the root of a lot of my politics and a lot of my writing. Yep.
So tell all our viewers why they should go out and buy the Kaduka. I mean, I think it sounds fabulous, and I'm telling everybody they should go out and buy the Kaduka. But from the author, why should everybody go out and buy this amazing book, the Kaduka?
Okay, if you're interested in thoughtful, political, but exciting fiction, then this is the one for you. And don't worry, if you're not into science fiction, it doesn't have any lasers at all, and it doesn't have very many spaceships. So if you think that, no, I don't like science fiction, don't be put off. Think of it as the thoughtful political story that really everyone should be interested in. So that's why everyone should buy it.
Brilliant. One last word, Elaine, before you go. What would you like to say?
Oh, buy the book. Buy everyone's book. Everyone should buy lots of books. It's really important. So, yay, reading.
Buy Elaine's book, The Kaduka. It sounds like an awesome read. It really does. It really, really does. So it's going to be coming out again. When, Elaine? Give us a
12th of March.
12th of March. So everybody, get your orders in.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Elaine. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Liz.